Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her guests bring you insightful conversations to awaken heart and soul consciousness. Come journey with us exploring the meaningfulness of astrology's energetic cycles and get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sue Rose Minahan, Talk Cosmos, and we're in the month of May. It's rather quiet time, it seems, as far as on the surface. I've wondered, is that because it is Taurus and it's Venus and it's peaceful? Maybe where I live, there's tourists and there's very few here in Hawaii. Whatever it is, it's a very welcomed moment. Kind of like the eye of the storm, perhaps. It's hard to know. At any rate, we'll find out. I have quite a bit involved for our conversation today about time travel, identity consciousness. It's a big subject, and it has little parts and big parts. So let's begin. We're ready.
Talk Cosmos engages unique events during the 3rd and 4th weeks of the month, featuring a myriad of new and returning guests. Joining host and founder Sue Rose Minahan, they co-create to explore and contemplate a wide spectrum of potent subjects. Embark on today's topic within our panorama of guests and insights as we welcome the astrologers for this conversation.
Well, hello, everybody. Guess who it is today? It's me, your host, Sue Minahan. And it just was a perfect storm, you might say, a good storm, where I had an opening. I had a talk that a project, a research I've been doing with a class and other sessions programs that I have. Just this large body of context that really would love to speak about. And I didn't have necessarily an exact transit today to bring in. So I thought, hey, this is a time, step up. It's something I've been wanting to do, reinvent. And isn't it the name of the times? Because Uranus is in Gemini. I am a Gemini. I have Uranus at my midheaven, conjunct Venus. It's a welcome time. As you know, I'm a consultant and an astrologer. I'm studying things and a speaker. So we'll get started with today, time travel identity consciousness. Time travel identity consciousness, it morphs throughout time. What is the time? Because there's timelessness in time, and humanity and the cycles really construct time. You know, the seasons. Dali here, this is Salvador Dali's Melting Clock. And it shows how really our memory of time and our consciousness of it is a story that keeps evolving. Depending who narrates is what we understand. And that is the beauty of it, is that at one time we get a chance to look back. That's what the retrogrades are, but then other repeating cycles, because astrologers, as we know, look to the future and by looking at the past. They look at the stars, the sidereal patterns there, to find out where the patterns are returning, both in aspects and larger patterns, one in relationship to the other. I often think of it like a survey. You know, somebody's surveying the sky. I can understand that it's on land, and that's what they do to get coordinates in that. But in this case, there are chapters, evolving chapters, because old themes get rebooted, just like a bunch of books. Usually the characters stay the same, yet sometimes it takes a whole new direction because it's like a climate. Is there a drought? Is there too much rain? Some plants live, some plants don't. However it is, it will begin this whole conversation, of course, with our solar system. And here is a little picture of it. I'm not so concerned with the inner ones. But starting with Jupiter, mostly, and Saturn, the social planets as we call them, every 20 years they connect, changing our social economic structures. And I have a chart for that too, but just to give identity here. And then, of course, there's Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, our friendly Yes, Pluto. This involves like the time cycles, large and small time frames that interlock. There's a whole myriad of them. And I know if you've been listening to other astrologers and myself here, just since 2026, we keep announcing all these magnificent magnitudes of cycles. And you can begin to isolate and think, oh, yes, of course. But they do have like backdrops, just like in a stage. You have your backdrop, you have your themes, and there's purposes. There's reasons to blend it and mend it, you could say. I'm thinking of a really large one, but realize that, like the hourglass, the time, we have our systems of measuring how we can really understand things, because when it's on such a big scale, it's like, how does it personalize? That's why people seem to love the moon. It's a 28-day cycle. It has its steady clockwork. And we can balance. Agriculture started that way. People still farm this way. And we're water. We, gravity pulls us like it does the tides, like it does the sun and the moon. So here are some of these big patterns, an overlay of what we have. I did them from Jupiter to Saturn to Uranus to Neptune, which then goes with Pluto, not necessarily to years, but to that. So Jupiter and Saturn, they conjunct every 20 years. But on a larger scale, as we just realized in 2020, there's a bigger 200-year scheme that involves changing from one whole element of consciousness to the next. We went from Earth, we understand what Earth is. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can sense it. At least that's what we've been thinking Earth is. And then we go to air, which one can say, yes, air is in water, air is in earth, air makes fire burn, but they really don't necessarily, one's formless and one's form. It's a big, many difficult shifts. We know that. They call it the grand mutation. Change, mutation. Saturn, Neptune. That is what's really instigated this, because recently, 2 months ago, on the 20th, it went to 0 degrees Aries in 45 minutes. Now, the next one will be in 36 years. They are every 36 years, yet they're in totally different signs. And as an astrologer, you go back, well, you had to go way back. And that's what this is involving. It's 6,400 years ago from there to the next one. How are we even understanding this? But there is, like every large thing, you have to break it down to incremental parts and see how it works. And then you'll get some storyline yourself. But it's Saturn and Neptune dissolve and integrate. We know that by their means. And on a higher spectrum, if one is looking at fundamentally what's important and what is mystical or imaginative and beyond any boundaries, that could be consciousness of source. Call it spirituality, call it the great whatever. Saturn Pluto is a 500-year. It's 30 to 38, but then it goes into these big 500-year conjunctions that spread out over longer periods of time, because they conjunct in that sign for 5 or 7 times. And it's a recalibration of society. The last one really was back in the 1500s when it was. So Uranus, Neptune. That one is relatively recent. In 1993, it was in Capricorn. And they're both outer planets. And then we have Uranus, Pluto. That's another huge one. Uranus is a shaker up by its very factor. It lays on its side, east to west, its horizons. It spins backwards. It disrupts the routine. And that's really its function in a way. It brings us back home to the moment. What are we really perceiving? What is it that we need to comprehend? If we've been listening to the signs, as they call it, and I think that's where Jupiter Saturn can help us, is to register closer. Then we can begin. It isn't so sudden and such an adjustment. Uranus, Pluto. We're heading towards a trine. That's a moment that is looked upon as a renaissance, actually. It was conjunct in the 60s in Virgo. It had a lot to do with about health and routine of days, breaking up our whole ideas of what those were, as really something astrologers and humanity has been working with constantly. It's another chapter. It's like a bench post or a pillar of our foundational base. All of these are hexagram, whatever you want to call it. They're parts of this whole picture. Then we come into Neptune and Pluto. That's 500 years. What else? Oh, the great conjunction in Cap. Okay, I said Saturn, Pluto. Well, when it comes to Pluto, it's long seasons because it's so elliptical. Most of the planets, and that's why it's a dwarf planet, they rotate within the sun's path, but not Pluto. It cuts the path, and you could say it cuts our consensus thinking. But the fact is that it's a 500-year cycle, and the last was in the late 1800s in Gemini. And it shifts. All of these are purging our consciousness, but we can only take one thing at a time. So back to the present somewhat. We have a pattern that's been happening actually since 2024 until 2028. But let's say since last year until next year, it's intense. And it is the outer planets. And it's going to be Uranus, these guys up here. Well, that's your Saturn and Jupiter. But Uranus and Neptune are sextile with, with Pluto. It's trine. They're in this pattern together, which is really the ongoing push to break away, purge, and expand the boundaries, to redefine the boundaries, to refine what is real, what is truth. It's not a simple task. I'm not saying it's roses. Roses have thorns. I had to remember that. You pick them. So let's get something more tangible right now. February 20th, 2026, Saturn and Neptune were at 0 degrees 45 minutes in Aries. It's cardinal, it's fire. And it's a 36-year cycle. The last one was in 1989 in Capricorn, Earth. And the one previous to that, because many of us are alive that remember these or had family members that were, 1952 to 53 in Libra, in air. And there's lots of historical data that indicates how these two act with each other that we can respond to. That in Capricorn, the Berlin Wall fell down, something that we thought was very stable. Nope, down it went. And it was liberation. You could, redefining things. And in 1952, it was about relationships. Since then, relationships have really taken on a whole new dimension. You could say with the civil rights that went into the 60s and then evolving through that with women's lib and gay rights and animal rights and pets. It is remarkable. And there's a destruction period. Right now, a lot of these are getting questioned. The story hasn't ended. It's a process. And in Aries, that's the important thing. We're in Aries, and that's a moment of self. How does the self relate to the whole of life? And how do we relate to ourself? We all have parts of ourself where we think, that isn't quite so developed, or no, somebody's told us differently. And that's where we can begin. We can start redefining, excavating, and understanding deeper patterns of embracing the whole of being, whether we have to use a crutch and walk on our paths, whatever it is. The next one in Aries won't be for a long time, 25, 28. So now is our time for 35, 36 years. This consciousness is reconstruction. It's like the architect to the dreamer. They're together. They want to get along. They're on a path of pioneering, of adventure, of discovery. Yet they really have distinctly different baggage that they're coming from, or concepts of we think of in their architecture. But we're not the ones defining this. This is a discovery as it goes along, because consciousness is always adjusting. It's what more are we aware of? And this universe of oneness that our ancestors felt very much akin to, because that's what they depended on, the patterns of the sky and the nature and the animals and the seasons. We've lost that somewhat in our sheltered calendars and the locks, and you just tear off a page and go to the next and reschedule things. But Aries, thinking about what Aries, it's brave, it's courageous. It says that it wants to become. It is that very inceptual start of things. And it takes strength, takes that inner resource to just act. I was just reading Let Them. It's a book that says, was that it? This gal, Mel Robbins, by Hay House. And she has a principle that she got her out of a heap of troubles, thousands of dollars in debt. Their grocery or their restaurant went belly up, $80,000 in debt, and couldn't get out of bed. But she had a family, and et cetera, et cetera. So she said, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. The moment she thought of something, and it worked. But it is a matter of bravery, of self, of honesty, of in vibrational astrology, David Cochrane researched, and Aries is when you are honest to yourself about what it is instinctively that you are doing, your actions. It is cardinal. It's going to act. So truth is core, and self, this idea that we are part of the whole and interconnected, the good, the bad, the different. And so if we're brave, we can connect to that heart and soul and really understand what we need. Why is this so important? Because we are in a huge, too big to think about, 6,400 year pattern. The last time this happened was before the wheel and before writing, at 4,361 BCE, before Common Era. There were 3 conjunctions then. March 3rd was the last one. And this happened to be just between the very end of the age of Gemini going into Taurus. Gemini, of course, of communication. They had tablets, but they didn't have writing as we know it during that time, 4,500 years ago. And Taurus, as we know, is really that age of possessions and resourcefulness and self-reliance. It is where we make form of things. But at that time, there was a Ubad culture that went to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and had been leaving from the Ice Age their nomadic life because there was agriculture and they were forming towns and rivers and trading. People were trading across the worlds, actually, from even the East. It's not as limited as sometimes our quick thinking perceives. They had family structures, and a lot of things were beginning during that time. Animal domestication, agriculture actually defined fatherhood because property, suddenly people owned property. They were farming the land and they claimed it. They were accumulating some wealth. They wanted to pass it on to their children. They were domesticating animals, getting new relationships, and trade. They didn't have writing, but in Babylonia later, it showed that these tablets that showed that Saul over here exchanged 20 liters of grain for 2 mules or whatever were an accounting system. And then eventually that established writing. So it was a huge transformation going from this period of Neptune and Saturn. That's the seahorse above. And that's an AI version of what Saturn, Poseidon was. Because, originally Poseidon was not such an easy energy. It was the ocean with thunderstorm, earthquakes. Well, looking at life on a more common process, thinking of the transpersonal, because in order to ground this, why are we looking at the past? Perhaps you've noticed there's a lot of interest in time travel on the movies. Well, the transpersonal outer planets were recently in Pisces. In the first 10 years of this century, 2003 to 11, Uranus, its 7-year cycle, was in Pisces, and Neptune, immediately following 2011 until just earlier this year, a 14-year cycle, was in Pisces. And all of the over-the-counter platforms, OTT streaming devices, Prime Video, Netflix, Stars, as we know it, have been pumping. Well, I find them fascinating. They certainly are on our list of listening to these amazing shows ever since this 20-year period involving time travel. And they've been wending their way through different concepts. There was Lost when Uranus was in Pisces. It was actually filmed here in Hawaii, in Oahu on the North Shore. And it's about airplane that fell into the sea and it morphed through all these periods of time. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button in 2008 was about really warped our thinking of time, because it took the individual born as an old man, as a baby, this wrinkled little baby, and as it died finally as a baby, when it died, it was back to being a baby, but as an infant. And it really teases your whole idea of the physicality, because there is this thought that we are spirit incarnated into form. In fact, there's a lot of thought that that's what Capricorn does, is that it innovates, it perceives the goal, it sees as that seagull leaving from the shore up to the mountain. It has a goal and it's manifesting all the time. It isn't just a clock that says, yay, you're bad, yay, you're good. No, it's not that. It may be a judgment just to say, hey, this need to be identified and worked on. It's a curious thing. Then in Neptune, Manifest, another airplane movie, was created. And what are these doing? These are forcing us to look back into time. It's like a constant message, like a dripping system. You see in a cave, the stalagmites and the stalagmites, and the lime just over centuries of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years forms until they meet into these columns. But it's a slow, repetitious idea, because anything we learn takes the willingness, it takes time. And interestingly, this has been a focus of lives of consciousness, you could say, coming from artistic souls. It's not just marketing. It's really something that is being peaked from the cosmos into our hearts and souls. So Manifest was again where time travel with an airplane, they lost 5 years of their time. It was this constant readjustment. Well, I think for the next batch, we will come back. Well, I'll finish this. Outlander is just finishing now, 8 seasons. It's interestingly started with a Pisces in 2014 when Neptune was in Pisces. And now it's finishing when Neptune is in Aries. So it's from the womb of the whole of this magnitude of all of consciousness, we could say. And now it's our step into how we go forward. And it's a time travel that takes 200 years difference in Europe and the United States, in many dimensions of history. And it's pretty current, really. Then there's Bon Appetit from Korea. This isn't just the United States. That happened last year when Neptune was in Aries. That's, I think, fascinating. And it flips back to an earlier time. Bon Appetit, Your Majesty. It highlights a female French star Michelin chef. And she finds herself transported to Korea, 15th century, where she must survive. To survive, she cooks for a tyrant king. But on all of these, it's like the consciousness of these people need to readdress what they had thought was something new that they're learning from the past. And I think that is really the emphasis, that there's something to be gained from looking back through all the myriads of the past, of not just the incremental, the wars one after the other, but the trend of expansion, discovery, disillusion, regrowth, just like we have the cardinal action to the fixation of form, to the mutation of energy that goes back into finding another way to get motivated, that gets drawn from, whether it's opposites or whether it's drawn from gravity, all of that metaphysical thinking. Well, let's get to 2026. This year, we have a wonderful show called The Way Home. And I think this really says a lot. I'll return with this just after this break. Thank you. Stay tuned. And we're going to tie this together. Like, what can we do? How can we understand what life is asking us to become in this new 6,400 journey of self, where we're just barely beginning the little seed of the root. Thank you. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We're currently in the period of Taurus. By leaving a cycle based upon initiation, the energy of Taurus integrates spirit into a solid form of matter that is tangible and physical. It's an earth sign, concerned with self-sufficiency and the values to maintain the strength of a life form throughout its survival.
Talk Cosmos ignites insightful conversations to awaken heart and soul consciousness with hour-long programs every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific on KKNW. Also available to watch live on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel and Facebook page. While you're there, make sure you click their like and subscribe buttons so you get the full Talk Cosmos experience. You can listen to earlier podcasts since 2018, either on most podcast carriers or under the video tab on Talk Cosmos YouTube. To join our expedition and find out about upcoming programs, sign up for the newsletter at talkcosmos.com and launch your week into the cosmic wonder.
This is Martha Norwalk. Every Sunday morning, beginning at 9 a.m., thanks in part to the Ananda Institute of Living Yoga, we cover the world of animals. This week, May 24th, it's an extra Sunday edition of Animal World. We'll spend most of it with animals24-7.org. That means Merritt and Beth Clifton will join us to fill us in on all the stuff that's happening with animals around this country and the world. Hope you can join us. Martha Norwalk's Animal World, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, right here on Alternative Talk, AM 1150.
Get your daily dose of variety. Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi again. So glad you came back. Okay, so The Way Home. It's right now. It started on Netflix and now it's on Hallmark. You can buy it for $16 on Amazon if you so wish, or just wait. It's the 4th season. But generally, it's about a family with 3 generations of women, and they have to jump into a pond, which is so fascinating to think that it started when Neptune was in Pisces, water, 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 thank you, and now it's going to that fire of identity, and we haven't quite found out how it'll be. But it's really this motivation to learn about a new consciousness, because in Aries, it's finding our own stepping stones. It's our own path. It's this mix of all this company of all of us merging together to find something. And it's finding what's possible out of what's impossible, knocking that right out of the door. And it's creative to find that action that works and to test it out. May not be the way we go, but rather than judge, just try something new. Self-identity, the consciousness process, it involves imagining, envisioning, being centered with yourself, forgetting the external. It's so easy in a kind way, in a thoughtful way. Eventually, if we're whole, of course we want that wholeness to work with other people. Yet it's really the balance. You need to take care of those little edges inside, as we know often. So it's internally being within the values that really sustain us, our truth, and taking some action steps, because that is evolution. Nothing stayed the same ever. It was always little incremental shifts. So borrowing universe doesn't destroy anything. It just repurposes. Take what you have and reframe it. Any little things kind of edges in a new motion. It starts the process. And it does involve connecting with people. Again and again, it's how, or connecting with what is meaningful to you. Any action, it draws that heart, it brings in. And creation needs uncharted time. It needs to engage with the unknown, just allowing it to be, seeing what evolves. And I think really this whole new venture that we're just beginning the thresholds of, that we're sharing by our own actions with those that we love and the world that we know, creating that world that we want, is becoming friends with the unknown. It was a scary place. It can be a scary place. No one's saying it doesn't have its dangers, yet it really is a matter of whether we are alone or whether our consciousness realizes that we're among many. However you see that, could be people, could be spiritual, it could be animals, it could be nature, it could be the universe itself. It's your business. And to know your boundaries, because again, that's part of self and others. Aries is self. We're related to everything, but where do I begin and where does somebody else begin? And if you're an empath and very sensitive, you might be borrowing their history or their problems. And to help them, you can't be hobbling on a crutch. You need to be able to walk on your feet. I never know when the middle will be. This is a new voyage for me. And at some point, I just bring attention to things happening. And there are many things with Talk Cosmos. And next week will be, very interestingly, vibrational astrology, looking at Uranus and Sedna, a whole nother enormous cycle, but through vibrational astrology with Linda Berry and Rob Passetti. And it's at 0 degrees Gemini, communication, getting uncharted. And that's what we're doing now. We're starting to talk. Because if we look back, what do we know? We know that in all of nature, there's spirals, a Fibonacci cycle that Rembrandt and Galileo and I'm losing the great Leonardo da Vinci, of course, with the human body that cycles, everything that's in proportion. Life is in a proportion, and it's a Fibonacci can never. Pi, for instance, can never end. It's endless. But there is a system, and it's a spiral, like flowers, like a shell, like the universe. And it is all life form. And this integration, I think we are finding, if possible, our ego with our tools. And it will involve re-embracing from the past about plants, people, pets, nature, everything. Because the tools that we first used back in the UBAD times were of tools of, well, whatever they were, but they were tools of use over nature. And yes, to a point, that's useful. And of course, we still have them, but we can use internal tools. It's not always working with the external. Like, what do we have within our instrument of inner truth, where we can be that co-creator, really be a partnership with our world. And it's a feeling process. It's changing from survival to expressing this universality, this source connection. We're tools, not tolls, that we're not separate from nature. Do you know, back in the myth of, in the early times of Taurus and Gemini, and it said it was creation myths that were big among our consciousness of conversation. And with, as the age, a procession of ages, 2,160 years, that we're now leaving Pisces, going into Aquarius, but we're on the cusp. It won't happen for another hundreds of years, it's suggested. That in Aries, it was the hero myth. Memory has a long chapter in some ways. We keep that idea that there is a winner. With the gods, it was where the gods took sides in battles, and even Marduk in Babylonia had to come over Tiamat, who was the earth goddess, and it's this conquering for independence. Well, perhaps that was part of the response of becoming agriculture and farming and all of this that, of course, we've evolved with. But the real truth of it is we can be together. We can have equality in our hearts. And once you find a ring to throw your hoop on, to throw your ring on, that's what we need. It's that star that you hang on to blend your course. It's like our North Star to go to, so that we can carry that consciousness ahead. But it isn't taking responsibility for the self. It's not blaming the other. If we go to another whole dimension of thought, Norse mythology, I'm studying Mani. Never heard of Mani before, but it happens to be the man in the moon. Now, I don't really know if Mani, M-I-N-I, if they had any idea of the word man back then. And it was Norse mythology. But it is a whole nother dimension, a higher octave of the moon, where Mani is the charioteer that drives the moon across the sky. But there is a finite time to their Norse mythology. Just like in a lot of mythologies, there's an end of the battles. And all cycles, that's the interesting thing about astrology, cycles end and begin. They can repeat and have another chapter and link into another, like a kaleidoscope, a whole nother vision. But it is true, like Saturn says, there is a stop and a beginning. So there is one in that. But by the way, the moon had his sister, Sol. They flipped it. The moon happened to be a male that carried the moon across, very nurturing. And the sun was Sol, the sister. Well, in the Norse mythology, when finally fear and really very negative drought and all the negativities come across in their thinking of their mythology, and it's the end of all, two remain. And they're fed by the moon drop. And the names of these people, the dew of it. It's like, think of the dew, that water that has condensed from all the temperatures of life. And the names of these two are life and lover of life. Seems to me to be, if we can go from a mythology of creation, where many times it was a mother nature, like, and then with the sky of Uranus in Western mythology, where they mated, but they weren't really friends with each other. And then there's these wars with the Olympian gods, or you take anywhere across the world. But this idea of these two that can however life recreates, but that it is on an equal basis, life itself and lover of life. Anything we love is an ongoing endurance. It seems to me that's a good mythology to consider, would be of equality. So going back into time, I didn't bring charts and all of that. You can delve into any of this yourself. It's more of a philosophizing over this whole spectrum of what are we being asked to do. There is a Hermetic code. I happen to love it. And the short version of it is 4 stanzas. As above, so below. So below, as below, so above. As without, so within. And as within, so without. In other words, this reflection, this myriad of cooperation that we do create. We are part of the creation process. You could say that. And of course, and so if we're going from the sake of survival, just that pure sake of besting the best riverbed against somebody else, or besting the best woman against somebody else, or the best man, or the best pet, or the best anything, but rather a cooperative thing where you love life and the liver of life, or the lover of life. It is an expression of universality, where somehow you recognize it. Yes, we're individual. Yes, we have our story. Yes, we're finding our way across the riverbed, you might say, of our stones, of our reason of going through this river or that river to find wherever we're headed in life, or across this ocean, or up that valley and across that, all these metaphysical ways of thinking, or whether we accept things or whether we don't. We all have a process. But it is somehow where we're unified in our needs of what matters and of our purposes and everything else. Because those tools that were in the very beginning, one was a token system back in the Ubaid period in Mesopotamia, that cradle where the writing finally did occur. It was on those clay tablets. And it finally shifted from counting to actually more, you could say, spiritual, because those cuneiforms, you could log stories. That's how they know Gilgamesh, it's said to be the first novel. And interestingly, Gilgamesh is about mortality. He went on this great hero's journey. He's a hero. And he had his great friend Enki, who died. And that traumatized him. It wasn't so much, interestingly, whether he'd be with Enki, unlike the Gemini twins, where Castor and Pollux, one is mortal and one is immortal. And Pollux wants to be with Castor, and so finally can share divinity and mortality and trade it off, because those are the Gemini twins. And we do traverse everywhere in our minds. But here, Gilgamesh really was thinking about his own mortality. So it happens to be, it's very much more involved from that. But it is interesting that, is life continual? Do we continue? What's our legacy? What matters to us is as ancient as our first story. So it was on these tablets that we could begin to even talking and sharing this idea. But they had other tools. There was one of the environment, irrigation and flow, the plow. They had to move the earth with the oxen. And that brought home this tool to earth. And it had permanent villages like Eridu. And people had leisure. They could actually think and contemplate, which eventually went into the Greek times of the golden era of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and many more, of medicine and whatnot. But they were able to meditate about the realities and really about it, because survival tools at that point worked. We're still working on our survival tools, but we still have that time to center into what we think, what we can decondition and understand in order to perceive and manifest that world that all these other energies are helping us with. Just being aware that we're in this huge spectrum, 6,400 years of a new identity. We get to choose. Choice, making a choice is a decision, and realizing we have responsibility over ourselves and over what we like, what we don't like, of what we're learning, of what we accept, of our parts of ourselves, no matter what. Me, I've been scared to talk. Can I convey these huge ideas? Well, you just have to start. You have to trust that there are people there that seem to be interested and wondering too at some moment. And whatever you say might trigger one thing or another. You know, anytime you think of conversation, sometimes it's just one thought that sticks in the brain. It's like, oh, that's an idea. What about that? Or it encourages things. So people can, with more tools that are efficient, operate more on a uncharted zone and understand what it is to create their own path, individuate. But there is another tool that was back from there that we might contemplate on, and that's the calendars. Because at that time, the ziggurats, I don't know if I'm saying that right. That's part of my language problem is speech. And a young child, I was taking at 5 years old, learning how to say my S words, which was helpful because my name is Sue. But I think that's how you say it. But those temples, and as you know, with all the Stonehenge and all the Easter Island, all the many, the mounds, the stone is what I'm trying to say, is the stone monuments that were left by the ancients. Göbekli in Turkey. That was like 12,000 years ago. And then the mounds, there's these earth mounds in the United States and North America, I'd rather say, than just a country. That all, when they're perceived, clock time, the equinox, the solstices, the eclipses, all these measurements that helped people understand what time of year they were in, because they had to work with nature. They had to work. That's another thing. Working with our environment instead of conquering and feeling like it's out to get us. We stop shifting that expression to life and lover of life as our companions and partnership, and that we're responsible. And it matters what we think and what we do. It's a beginning. It's a good start. And they needed to know the basics. When was the Nile in that riverbed of Euphrates, Tigris and Euphrates? When was it going to flood? Because then that's when the grain would grow, and that's when they could trade all their grain for the things they needed, and etc. Well, with Talk Cosmos, there are many shows to go about and listen to. And I thank you very much for this opportunity. It is a reflection that just by accepting a part of ourself, and instead of freezing in that moment of recognizing, because Chiron, as of yesterday, the new moon in Taurus, and you can see last week with Amanda and I that went through a wonderful series of the new moon at 25 degrees Taurus. And then next in 2 weeks on the 31st will be the 9 degree Sagittarius full moon. Brings an immediate stepping point, because within that new moon of Taurian resourcefulness and form and growth is Chiron, the wounded healer, conjunct Mars of action, and that rules Aries. And Aries isn't far away. I know I brought in about the wars and the gods and the goddesses taking sides and all that. That was in the Trojan War. It was a 10-year process, but the very last year is what everybody remembers. And that was when Achilles, the greatest hero, warrior that is, went through a huge time of identity. It's like, do we need to be where we're conquering and we have ownership and possessions? Can we trust ourselves to know our own self? In that case, it was, oh boy, I don't know if I should get started on that story. So let me click forward a little bit. But in Aries, it is that honesty. It is that sense of understanding what's true to us. We can only know what we know through experience. And that's the beauty of it. It's the invitation. It's really an invitation to begin, to reach out to. So with Chiron, going back to that new moon that happened yesterday, that's happening right now in conjunct, it's embracing all of ourselves. That's right. The war started with the Trojan because she said, Paris won, who's the fairest of you all? And it wasn't really, it was just for inclusion versus exclusion, to include everything. So we need to include all of ourselves. And whether one hits the mark or whether one doesn't hit the mark, as sense of perfection, well, there's always another chance, an opportunity. And I hope each of you take your steps, because right now it's really a doorway, a threshold to continually see where in your own immediate life you can take some time out to maybe discover more what it is that's your stepping stone, what it is that your heart really wants you to plow through and irrigate and water. You might say what tool or what tablet, maybe write on a journal some messages, or your altar of what you want to honor and understand. Because as we adjust, it is a process. It's a huge process. That's the basic bottom line. And where everybody is at their own moment. Yet we can exchange and share. And this is the year one. It's a fire horse year. We can start off. Your healing journey can be an alchemy to just somehow starting that whole invisible way of 6,400 years to becoming your sovereignty of life and the lover of life. So I thank you for this opportunity. I'm glad I stepped up. I feel better. I have tons and tons of information and all kinds of wonderful new things to discover. But this is enough. It's enough to understand that we're in a kaleidoscope of moments. One's no really more important than the other. It's what you choose. It's like the moment that you embrace, that you pick up the wheel and you carry it forward, your light. I think with that said, take this Uranus-Neptune-Pluto triangle. We have this opening for another couple of years, a Renaissance time, because we can hold both love and beauty and hope within chaos. I think that's what's really important. We can have and both. Don't need to choose anymore. You, they, them. It's us together, self in nature. Thanks, folks. To the journey.
Thank you for joining this vibrant and insightful conversation on Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her guests awaken consciousness by connecting heart and soul consciousness patterns with astrology's energetic cycles. Be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place, to continue your journey through the roots of the cosmic pathway.